There were 4 of them as far as I was able to count. They jumped in and out of every opening in the line. We were losing men fast. Every time one of them stepped in, a handful of our lads would be wounded or dispatched. The whistle was used accordingly. The lads wised up and began tightening the line, just like in practice. The idea was to limit single combat as much as possible so the elven bastards would not get an upper hand on us so easily. We were ambushed masterfully by a band of Uruks as we were navigating a ravine with our wagon convoy on the 3rd meat train to Salzbrud. The Darkbloods were fighting as well as expected from Uruks. We were holding our ground well against them. It was the Dark Ones we were losing the day to. A handful of tall, black-armored foes were tipping the scales of battle single-handedly. Every time our line buckled under the dark blood onslaught, the nimble apparitions would find a way to join the fray and make our line falter further than it should. So far, the alchemicals kept our morale in check, and we did not flee nor collapse the whole front. Our replacements stepped into the gaps as grist for the mill, with stoic determination. The 2 shield walls were slugging it out. Not much give on either side, other than the places where the Dark Ones pressed against. We were clad in steel from head to toe, and drugged to the gills in the murkiest alchemicals, yet this was not enough to ward us from elven butchery. It was an appalling sight watching them work on our numbers. They were fast, yes. They seemed to be strong as well. Many foes were, and yet none ever landed such carnage on us. This was a whole new level of ruin. What made them so deadly was the way they staggered our efforts into either a passive stupor or an overextending zeal. The speed and decisiveness with which they exploited our hesitation seemed to be woven in with unnatural force. They knew every time we would hesitate away from a feint, so they could capitalize and pull initiative. They also knew right away when we would try and land a hit, so they would draw us out for the kill. It was as if they read our minds. The ease and speed by which they exploited and wove the feints within the feints made them implacable to us. Our only defense was to keep our lines tighter, so we could try and gang up on them. Unfortunately, the Uruks were holding their own well enough, presenting a stable platform for the Elves to spring from. This was a losing fight, due to 4 creatures that were giving the Uruk line the extra edge. Red mist erupted from the lads each time a Dark One would close in with our line. Elven blades moved as if guided by several hands at the same time, with cunning intent moving aside arms and limbs, finding the weakest spots as a parched man drinks water, perpetually baiting and trapping the foe. An exchange of false leads, vain attacks, and devastating counters. I gave the signal and we emptied half of our cargo. There was no profit to be had with no brothers to share it with anyway. The piss mist spread around our wagons, and sure enough, it also reached the battle line. The orcs started voiding themselves, while our brothers made the best of our respirators and unleashed hell on a massively distracted foe. The elves immediately retreated. Not that they could not have endured the dread fog, but without Uruk's support, the fight might have gone sideways for them. Year of our Lord 915, day of the phosphorus dog. We did the unthinkable. We withstood a dark elf ambush. Cost us just short of 100 men, and half our contraband piss missed. But we were alive and stoked for it. A freak accident happened, 1 in a 10,000 chances. One of the elves caught a crossbow bolt to the eye. He was laying there, limp and broken, the cheap wood of the bolt sticking out of his grotesque yet lavishly ornate plate helm that would value more than the full company. It looked perverse. A simplest of tools, shot by one of our camp followers at the foe's general direction, from one of the wagons, no doubt. Somehow it struck home, and we struck gold. Big time. This was a thank you Jesus shot. At that point, I felt sick with joy looking at his corpse. All the possibilities, all the loot. I ran a quick appraisal in my head. What I could do to maximize profit. The head would get pickled for a sea crosser's alchemist bench. An elven brain is a reagent rarer than a comet shard. The armor and gear would most likely be sold to Malfred the Guilty, an elector count down south. Any gems or trinkets devoid of any discernible anomalies would be auctioned in Segrathal the Golden Port. Anything with even a trace of an anomaly would be discarded at the nearest quester compound, of course. The half-orc monks would have it no other way, and for good reason. The price for dark elf weaving is the suffering and torment of slave breeds. Such an absurd, cruel race baffles belief. We would have no part in sustaining their craft. Profit is great, but the darkness below must be fought inside as well. Greed shall not overrule our Christian duty. The headless hootie would go to the Cleaver brothers, however. Meat is meat, and the pigs have to eat. There are those upon the path that are not as fortunate as we. They have no battle brothers. They cannot procure food on their own, as the whole farmer's way of life has been scuttled by Cruniac's sprawling gut cloud. Roving bands of starving refugees haunt the roads, scavenging what or who they can. This is an abomination in the eyes of God, having our brothers and sisters dehumanized in such a way. So we do what we can. We have employed pig herds along with our camp followers. We feed the ravenous animals the corpse's war provides us with. The resulting pork is then fed to the refugees we encounter. It's not much. Rarely is it enough. But it's something. And if you would have seen what a starving man can do, you would forgo any moral qualms you might have about this arrangement. Starvation dehumanizes even the most stalwart. We fight this evil, so that we may keep the light of humanity still burning in the burgs. A hard vigil. The hootie looked perfectly harmonious, muscular in a wiry way, devoid of hair or blemish, with hard edges and opal skin. It should have been a treat for the hogs. Until my eye caught a detail. One of the tattoos was moving, changing. Cryptic writings in their dreaded tongue were finishing his body art an hour after the skin's death. Poetic and demented. I decided we should just burn the corpse so as not to contaminate the pigs. The lads argued for flaying the body and burning the skin alone, but I was not going to get browbeaten over eldritch safety measures. To the pyre it went, and good ridden. A dark elf is a rare sight. Much rarer since the Emperor, Eldrick Ermengild, concluded his extermination wars. Elves, to begin with, are rarely seen outside their secluded lands. Dark elves more so. The chances of one getting hit by a random bolt in the eye are non-existent. Thank God for miracles, I guess. This mixed ambush group knew of our mission. No big surprise there. Information like all else is bought or obtained with ease by the Dark Elves. Few ever gaze upon a tree hugger. Fewer still get the chance to tell of it. Cursed enigmas, the whole breed. They wield the power to rule over all creation, yet they've never shown the slightest interest in it. Like apes gazing at a spear brandishing human. That's how we probably view elves. Calloused fey intelligence lurks behind their eyes. Faces like angels, voices like running water, and yet they most commonly act with the cold detachment of inscrutable monsters. They live, concentrated in 7 colossal sprawling cities, and the lands that surround them, places founded by their gods in the beginning of creation, whose size alone sets them apart from other creatures. Veils of clouds protected these lands from the eyes of men, before Cruniac's gut ever sprawled forth upon the world. Armed guardians make sure that only those desired ever make it to the immortal cities. Such a lot has always existed, even if covered by veils of secrecy and superstition. All the immortal cities drink a cornucopia of slaves drawn from the different breeds in a proportion derived from the requirements of that specific city. Some go willingly to their new masters, others go as prisoners, bound by their peers to be paid as chattel. None of the cities drinks more souls than Calarun, the immortal city of 7 hills. 7 crafts that the elves diligently seek, 1 hill for the fulfillment of each. We are tasked by the Traders Guild of the Burg of Simfort to deliver a sample of halfling laborers for elven evaluation. It's a messy mission, Our employers are timid about their attempt. There's a reason why no one ever tried this. Elves are very rigid in their view of themselves as guardians of light and creation. They are easily offended, so this mission could easily be a faux pas. It is a commonly known fact that the High Elves of Calarun, Eternal City of Seven Hills, have long been using indentured servants to more efficiently dedicate themselves to their impersonal firmament god. Outright slavery is prohibited in their lands, however. Calarun is the largest elven settlement, their capital, if you will. The elves living there are some of the brightest beacons of wisdom and skill. Their indentured servants live better off lives than most humans in the burgs do. They are not subject to any cruelty from what we know. They are not considered chattel property, and yet they are nowhere near free to wander about. Their lives revolve around the toil they can do to prepare some of their master's raw materials. In this way, the elves have more time to only work the refined key parts of their craft, and somehow also fit in their day the deity worship they are so keen on. Mending the veil, they call it. This veil entity is sort of a god to them. They spend most of their conscious lives pampering it with a sort of a trance-like state of concentration. The veil speaks to its menders through the safeguarded imprints of all the elves that have ever lived. It is like a narcotic communion that almost all living elfdom indulges in, with religious fervor and loyalty. Hobbits have very little going for them. They are a slave breed, have been a slave breed for as long as written history goes. Only recently have a significant number of them had their condition improved by some of the Enlightenment movements. For every 10 humans, there are 4 halflings, or so the questorial census says. They are bred like dogs for different purposes. Unlike dogs, however, they live in horribly crowded pens, concentrating 4/5 of their population in a few places. If properly managed, they eat very little and work very much. Due to their dexterous nature, they are capable manual laborers, even more so than most humans. They fill 9/10 of all the man-made manufactorums. I don't feel sorry for the little buggers we are carrying. If accepted by the elves for evaluation, they would be escaping a horribly overworked existence in the burgs. There are even humans that choose a life of servitude in Calarun over a hefty compensation they can leave behind to their families. We shall be traveling down the meander for the rest of this mission. We have a dozen trade cogs, loaded with halfling cages. I pondered upon releasing the little critters to roam freely about the boats, but thought better of it and decided to keep them sex separated. There's a reason they are called rabbits or rats. The breed profusely and rapidly. We were given Cruniac feed for them. I'm not sure why, since it would have made them a lesser valued commodity if they had mental issues by the time they reached the elves. Bloody trade barons. I refused to poison the little bastards. We traded some of the Cruniac powder for a few pigs, so we gave the little critters pork to gnaw on. This way their minds were safeguarded. We were lucky enough to have a long patrol escort on our way south, a literal fort built on a giant system of rafts, sort of a moving lacustrine village. It was designed by the Emperor before his descent into Cruniac, to watch over the dark blood threat ever glooming from the western Thornland. The long patrol is a brotherhood of soldiers that double up as merchants. Since they continuously navigate up and down the meander's length, they also load their forts with trade goods. Nobody bothered us on our way south. God be praised for no more casualties. As a footnote, I must add that the oldest tales regarding the Dark Elves predate humanity. It is via dark-blood slaves that humans first learned of what lurks in the dark tunnels of the Northern Baronies. Worshipped as gods by the Darklings, evil and degenerate beyond comprehension, with whims as poisonous as their minds, the Dark Elves have been preying upon mankind since before we could articulate speech. They are a cursed elven phenotype. Initially, the Dark Ones were an entity of high elven culture, different from the other elves because of their strictly self-centered view of the world. All was permitted as long as it furthered elven well-being. This included any use of the other races. or of the world surrounding them. This led to inevitable conflict with those that followed the Maker, the Elven All-Father or Creator deity, that supposedly sired the Elves as the steward race for creation. A religious war followed, waged between the two factions. Short but very costly in what casualties are concerned, due to the high power weaving involved on all sides. This left both populations depleted, and the Sindar Seven Kingdoms ravaged beyond repair. Ultimately, fearing the annihilation of the species, the Dark Elves tried to cease the conflict and enter a self-imposed exile. The Eldar would not relent, however, and pursued their kin with a religiously fueled hatred, rather risking being wiped out than tolerating the Dark Heresy, as Elven utilitarianism was called by the remaining High Elves. What fragments of population escaped the extermination zeal sought refuge in the World's Edge Mountains. Cruniac. The Maw beckoned the Maker's dark children. Having no other escape from the pursuit of their kindred, the Dark Elves entered Cruniac using their orc slaves as guides. There are always those amongst the Dark Bloods that worship Cruniac. Some of them are bestowed the meat eyes of second sight. Meat grows inside their eyeballs, till it replaces them with organs fit to sense the ever-changing path to Cruniac. By this point in the conflict, the race of men were little above apes huddling in caves, primal heathens, worshipping fire. The Dark Elves found great potential in their genotype, however. Upon their descent into Cruniac, a breeding lot of proto-humans was carried away. Contact with Cruniac is forbidden in Maker cults. The only High Elves that pursued the Dark Ones in their flight are the group later called Sons of Perdition, a fanatical Maker sect that focused all of their efforts in furthering the goals of their creator, even at the cost of their own souls. The Sons of Perdition continued to doggedly hunt down the Dark Elves within the bowels of Cruniac. Time passes differently within the Great Maw. We can only speculate for how many eons the frantic and the fanatical waged war within Cruniac. All we do know is that in the year of our Lord 835, the Dark Ones entered conflict with the dwarves of the World's Edge Mountains. This is the first record of the Dark Elves existing as a distinct phenotype from their Sindar brethren. Much more muscular without losing their athletic build, with angular features, black-haired and gray-eyed, they resemble their cousins, except for the milky, nearly transparent skin. From the year 835 on to the year 1648, present eve, the Dark Elves impacted the human boors in a very limited manner, being fully engrossed by their conflict with the dwarves. We do not know the outcome of the war, the dwarves of the World's Edge Mountains being as opaque to us as the Dark Ones. For a certainty, it did not go without consequence in what the dwarves are concerned, as starting with the year 1649, all dwarven trade with the surface world stopped without an explanation. Soon to follow, the Dark Elves started raiding the baronies for prisoners. By the grace of Christ, the Emperor was ascended at this point. So was the Silent Legion. The retaliation was fierce. Thus the 4 wars of extermination began. 1 against the Dark Elves, 1 against the Mountain Orcs, and 2 against the spawns of Cruniac, inside and outside the Bourgs. Our company, the Sons of Dismas, fought on the side of the Emperor. The war with the Dark Elves provided us with prisoners, tougher nuts to crack than any human the Dark Ones are. But Vitae Weavers were involved in the information extraction process. The prisoners had no chance of withholding anything from the inquiry. The information gathered allowed a better understanding of the foes and their situation. We learned that the war with the dwarves was still raging, a struggle bitterly fought by both sides. The Dark Ones suffered a dismal loss of numbers, yet this was not the worst that befell them. Peerless alchemists and bitter foes, the dwarves used weapons of an abhorrent nature, powders that would be carried in the winds, binding themselves to the very nature of the foe, changing them irreparably. They discovered the Dark Elf cities and used the wind powders on the full population. The fumes worked their evil in an unseen way. The cursed elves were oblivious to their peril until flight was impossible. The wind powders worked like a plague, something that any elf would be immune to. Not this time. Total loss of hair, vomiting, and worst of all, sterilization were the symptoms for almost all the Dark Elf population. The very few ones that escaped became the last hope of the Dark Eldar. A devilish program was enacted to pull the elves out of extinction. Surrogate mothers would develop implanted Eldar fetuses. This existential need was what drove the Dark Elves to foray for slaves on the surface. Divided in a patchwork of petty kingdoms, federations, and free cities, the Borgs seemed like a ripe fruit to the Dark Elves. The Emperor, Eldrick Ermengild, was yet to unveil the hidden might of the Silent Legion.